In this video we're going to see just how versatile a tiny tarp of only 2.8 by 1.5 metres can be, especially as this video is focusing on A-frame variants and roughly A-frame style shelters. I've got a few sticks from the river to go along with my walking poles, we've got a DD Hammock's SuperLight Tarp S, and I've got a selection of pegs and guy lines. I'm going to start with the most basic of shelters here, the simple A-frame. I've pegged in the rear two corners. Then I'm just really using my walking poles here as a bit of a guide at this point, just so I know roughly where to peg in those two front corners. Then at this point, as I add a guy line to each of those trekking poles and stake them pulling apart, you can see the shelter starts to look far more proper and inviting. Of course, with this setup, without using a ridge line, which we'll discuss in other videos, it's got a very soft centre. However, if you are in light drizzle, a gentle breeze, or on a day like today just want some shelter from the sun beating down on you all day, then this is going to do the job, and it's certainly better than nothing. The air mattress that you've just seen me place in there is 188 by 56 centimetres, just so you've got an idea of the rough size and the sort of shade and shelter this is producing. As we move in for a closer look now, I'll repeat, this is definitely a tight squeeze and potentially claustrophobic shelter that we've got here. However, this is just showing you if you're in an emergency, this is using two guy lines and 6 pegs with the tarp. As simple and easy and quick as possible to set up, but this is where it gets more interesting. We can lift up those front corners by removing the peg, adding a guy line, and then stretching the guy line out as far as possible to just raise it up and make it feel that little bit more open. I also want to point out here, if you wanted to try and solidify a little shelter like this, you could of course add a lot more pegs to the loops, you could add more guy lines in different directions, or what I'm going to do here is grab a bit of driftwood that's washed up on the river and use that to create a proper little awning for my tiny tarp shelter. Once again, this is going to be the simplest process in the world. Unpeg that front guy line, prop the corner of the tarp up with a stick, and repeg the line, and then repeat for the other corner. And this is just highlighting what I love about these tarps, how easy they are to use, how versatile they are, and how many micro adjustments you can make. We could use different size sticks, even break a little bit off, and remove a couple of inches of the height of that front opening. So you can see here now, this is not really a claustrophobic space at all. In fact, some people would argue this is now too open to the elements. For me, on a day like this is providing all of the airflow you could want, while also giving you a good area of shade from the sun. And it's also, if it was raining, unless it's particularly windy, you've still got a decent bit of overhead cover from the rain. I was just illustrating there the size of the area that the ropes and lines take up, because I like to have them quite far away from the shelter, really pulling outwards on the tarp. If you do like all these tarp videos, please check out my other videos for loads of tutorials of tarps of different sizes, and you get to see me go out camping and sleeping in these things. To end, let's build a flying A-frame from scratch. I'm going to lengthen my trekking poles to give us some extra headroom, and I'm going to add a guy line to each of the corners of the tarp. So I've guyed out the rear corner, then I've put the trekking pole there just as a rough guide of where I then want to peg out the front guy line. Once again, on the opposite side, I'm going to peg out that rear corner on the guy line. Then I'm going to put the trekking pole in place just to give me a rough idea of where that front guy line will need to be placed. So you can see here, doesn't matter if it's not perfect and it's falling over, we're just trying to get those first pegs in so that we've got a foundation to work with, and then we can easily fine tune these tarps using the guy lines and shifting the pegs around. And once we're happy with the rough placement, we can add a guy line to each of those trekking poles. And once again, just as with the simple A-frame we began this video with, as those trekking poles are pulled out, it immediately starts to look far more like a proper shelter. And here you can see again, there's plenty of fine tuning and little bits of adjustment you can do, and it's just the nature of tarps. They're so versatile that even depending on the hilliness and slight bumps of the terrain, you can alter the guy lines and adapt. Although this shelter's only used 6 guy lines and 6 pegs, and is nowhere near as tough as you could build it if you had more pegs and guy lines to add, it's not too bad, and certainly in these gentle weather conditions, that's perfectly serviceable. You can see here though I'm indicating just how much space around the actual shelter is sort of out of bounds because of the risk of stepping on and tripping over the guy lines themselves. I'm such a fan of leaving no trace that I literally took my driftwood right back to the river's edge, and I just want to share a few additional thoughts about these shelters. So, of course, I've done these quickly just in a nice plain field for the camera. You could do the same sort of thing as this using tree branches in the woods to tie to, and of course, you could also really strengthen them by adding more guy lines and more pegs if you were spending the night, for example, or in windier conditions. Equally, remember just how versatile these are, and when you saw me raising the front by increments for the camera, I could have also been doing the back at the same time so that it was completely open on both sides with just different levels of pitch, I suppose, to it. And ultimately, I hope you've enjoyed this and will check out all of my other tarp and camping videos. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters out there, whether that's through PayPal, channel membership, Facebook subscriptions, and super thanks. It really means a lot to me, and as many of you know, without you I wouldn't have even got this tarp. Oh yeah, this wasn't a sponsored video, I did buy that tarp myself. Until the next time, my friends, keep it interesting, keep it tarp worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, farewell.